are now at our fourth stop of the Moravian Archives History Tour, and this brings us to the North Campus of Moravian College. In previous episodes of this series, we've learned about various locations in which the Moravian Church in North America has preserved its records. In this episode, we learn about the fourth major location of the Moravian Archives in Bethlehem, the Archives Building at Main Street and Elizabeth Avenue. Sometime between 1923 and 1929, Moravian College alumnus and then faculty member, Professor Howard Hoffman, donated land to the college that he had purchased for $23,500 at the southeast corner of Main Street and Elizabeth Avenue. Thanks to other donations, a dormitory was built on this block, parallel with Main Street, and it was proposed that a second unit would be built on this block, beginning to form a new quadrangle. The Archives Committee resolved that it would be advantageous to have the new Archives building on the campus of Moravian College and Theological Seminary. After all, the archivist at this time, William Nathaniel Schwartze, was also the president of Moravian College and Theological Seminary. The Archives building would be perpendicular to the new dorm and designed by the same architects, Wegener and Snyder. On August 16, 1930, the first Archives Committee meeting was held in the new Archives building, with C.F. Schussela's impressive Power of the Gospel painting overlooking the committee. The new Archives building was reportedly the first denominational archives constructed in the United States, and it was open to the public for research. According to a 1939 report of the Pennsylvania Historical Commission, materials in this new building were, quote, accessible to qualified scholars upon application to the director, end quote. The archivist who had seen it through to fruition was Dr. William Nathaniel Schwartze, who served as archivist from 1906 to 1948. Speaking of, here are some other archivists who served the Moravian Archives in this location. According to former archivist Dr. Vernon H. Nelson, the Archives building contained approximately 8,000 square feet of usable floor space. Visitors would walk into an open space 2 stories high. The main floor was lined with bookshelves. One alcove on the main floor, known as the Estey Manuscript Room, named in memory of William Estey, a Lehigh University professor, contained a bulk of the most significant manuscripts in the collection. Also on the main floor was the Mullen Room, used as an office but containing the important Mullen Library that was introduced in Episode 3 of the series. On the second floor was the Haidt Gallery, which featured portraits painted by Moravian minister and artist Johann Valentin Haidt. These portraits overlooked the main floor of the Archives building. A third floor, with 10 individual rooms, was used to store many additional manuscripts. A lot happened in these years in which the Archives was preserved in the Archives building at Main Street and Elizabeth Avenue. Many accessions, or new donations or transfers of records from Moravian congregations, agencies, and individuals were received. Groups felt comfortable sending their records to be preserved in the fireproof Archives building. For example, in 1955, the records of the Bethlehem Female Seminary were deposited in the Archives building. There was also a major expansion of staff. For example, K.G. Hamilton, eventual Moravian bishop, was hired as the first paid Assistant Archivist in 1937. There were also major efforts to establish a modern archives program. A group of scholars, primarily non-Moravians, convened at the Archives in the spring of 1959, laying out a series of guidelines for continued development and improvement of the Archives, its facilities, and its services. Here's a list of those who convened as consultants for the Archives. One of the outcomes of the 1959 conference just mentioned was to attract more interdisciplinary research projects at the Moravian Archives. That said, the Archives began to focus on becoming a more public-facing institution. Unlike research being conducted mostly by Moravian clergy in the past, as many as 3 outside researchers might be seen on the same day conducting research in the Archives. Another major milestone, the Friends of the Archives group, which engages donors, was organized in 1968, an important step to promote, fund, and develop work at the Archives. It's also worth mentioning that the Moravian Archives held its first German script course in 1971. Today, the Moravian Archives approaches its 50th annual script course, an offering that has earned the Moravian Archives international recognition in paleography and German studies. So, you might ask, why didn't the archives stay in this building forever? Well, much time was spent in the early 1970s determining how to renovate the building so that it would have air conditioning, climate controls, and other features. Continuation of such plans was even approved by the Provincial Synod of the Moravian Church's Northern Province in August 1970. Nonetheless, the Moravian Archives would eventually move out of the building in 1976 when the amount of records outgrew the available space, and Moravian College was eager to use the building for other purposes. Today, the old archives building is adjoined to the old dormitory, Colonial Hall. The entire L-shaped structure bears the name of the latter. For Moravian College, Colonial Hall houses various offices, including the Office of the President and Administration, Admissions, HR, and Financial Aid. As mentioned, the Moravian Archives would eventually move out of the building in 1976 and into a new space. Stay tuned for Episode 5 of the Moravian Archives History Tour to find out where the Moravian Archives moved to next.